You spend years in school learning things, or at least that's what you believe. You sat in classrooms, took notes, memorized definitions, passed exams. From the outside, it looks like progress. It feels like progress. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what you call learning isn't learning at all. It's repetition. You are trained to remember, not to understand. And those are not the same thing. You think knowing something means you understand it. But that's the illusion. You can repeat a definition perfectly and still have no idea what it actually means. You can solve problems by following steps and still not understand why those steps work. This is where most people get trapped. They confuse familiarity with understanding. Just because something feels known doesn't mean it's truly understood. Think about this. If someone asked you to explain a concept you studied last year without using textbook language, could you do it? Not recite it, not repeat it. Actually explain it in your own words, simply enough that a child could understand. Most people can't, and that's not because they're stupid. It's because they were never taught how to think in the first place. School gave you answers before you even had questions. It showed you formulas before you understood the problem. It trained you to move forward, not to slow down and ask why. So you learned to follow, to accept, to trust the system without questioning it. And over time, that habit became your way of thinking. Here's the contrast nobody points out. Real learning feels slow, confusing, even frustrating. Memorization feels fast and satisfying. One builds understanding, the other builds illusion. And because the system rewards speed and accuracy, not depth, you are pushed toward the easier path, the one that looks like intelligence but isn't. This is why so many people forget everything after an exam. Not because they didn't try hard enough, but because nothing was truly understood. It was stored temporarily, then erased, like writing on water. And yet they move on to the next topic, believing they're learning more, when in reality, they're just stacking layers of confusion on top of each other. But here's the part that changes everything. If you feel like something never fully made sense to you, if you struggled to memorize or felt slow compared to others, that might not be a weakness. It might be a sign that your brain was resisting shallow learning, that you were trying, even without realizing it, to actually understand. And that puts you in a very different position, because once you see this illusion for what it is, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often people speak without understanding, how often knowledge is just repetition. And more importantly, you begin to realize something uncomfortable. You were never taught how to learn. But here's where it gets worse. It's not just that you didn't learn properly. It's that the system was never designed for you to. From the very beginning, school trained you to play a game, not to think, not to question, but to perform. You were given information, told it was important, and then tested on how accurately you could repeat it. The better you repeat it, the better your score. The better your score, the smarter you were considered. But think about that for a second. Since when did repeating information become the definition of intelligence? You were rewarded for speed, not depth. For correct answers, not real understanding. If you asked too many questions, you slowed the class down. If you tried to deeply understand something, you fell behind the schedule. So you adapted. You stopped asking why. You started focusing on what would be on the test. And that shift changes everything, because now you're no longer learning. You're optimizing. You begin to study patterns, not ideas. You memorize steps, not meaning. You learn how to solve questions, not how to understand problems. And the system rewards you for it. High grades, praise, recognition. It feels like success. But underneath that success, something is missing. Understanding. Here's the contrast that most people never notice. The top student in class is often the one who memorizes the fastest, not the one who understands the deepest. They can recall formulas instantly, but ask them to explain what those formulas actually represent, and things start to fall apart. Not always, but more often than you think. And the opposite is also true. The student who struggles, who takes longer, who asks questions that seem basic, is often the one trying to build real understanding. But the system doesn't reward that. It labels it as slow, as weak, as behind. So what happens? People start hiding their confusion. They nod when they don't understand. They copy notes without thinking. They memorize just enough to pass, then forget it immediately after. And over time, this becomes normal. Entire classrooms full of students moving forward without truly understanding anything deeply. It looks like education, but it's not. It's training. Training you to accept information without questioning it. Training you to trust authority over your own thinking. Training you to value answers more than understanding. And the longer you stay in that system, the harder it becomes to break out of it. Because you start believing that this is what learning is supposed to feel like. Fast, pressured, surface level. But it's not. Real learning doesn't fit neatly into exams. It doesn't move at the same speed for everyone. It doesn't reward memorization over curiosity. And that's exactly why it doesn't survive inside most classrooms. So the system continues, producing students who can pass tests but struggle to think independently. People who know many things but understand very little. And the most dangerous part, they don't even realize it. So if the system trains you to memorize, then what was removed? Not a subject, not a chapter, a way of thinking. There used to be a method so simple that most people overlook it. Not because it's hard, but because it feels almost childish. And that's exactly why it works. It forces your brain to stop accepting and start seeing. The method is this. You don't move forward until you understand. Not in textbook language, not in memorized steps, in your own words, in your own mind. You take an idea, strip away the complicated terms, and rebuild it from scratch. You ask yourself, what is actually happening here? If this were real, if I could see it, what would it look like? How would it behave? Why does it work this way and not another way? That process changes everything, because now you're not storing information, you're constructing it. Here's the contrast. Memorization is passive. You receive and repeat. This method is active. You question, translate, and rebuild. One keeps you dependent on external answers. The other makes you capable of generating your own. But this is where most people stop. Because the moment you try to do this, you feel resistance, confusion, slowness. It feels like you're doing something wrong, like you're falling behind. And that's exactly why this method disappears from most classrooms. It doesn't look efficient. It doesn't produce fast results. It doesn't fit the system. So it gets quietly removed. Not officially. Not announced. Just replaced. Replaced by shortcuts, formulas, techniques that help you get the right answer without ever understanding why it's right. Replaced by methods that prioritize speed over depth. And over time, people forget that there was ever another way. But here's the truth. Every real thinker uses this method. They slow down where others rush. They question what others accept. They refuse to move on until something makes sense in a way they can see, not just repeat. And because of that, what they learn stays with them. It connects. It builds. This is why some people can forget everything after an exam, while others remember concepts for life. It's not intelligence, it's method. And once you start using it, something strange happens. You begin to notice gaps in your understanding. Things you thought you knew suddenly feel unclear. Not because you're getting worse, but because you're finally seeing properly. You're no longer hiding behind memorization. At first, that feels uncomfortable, but then it becomes addictive. Because every time something clicks, it's different. It's not the shallow satisfaction of remembering. It's deeper, more stable. You don't just know it, you understand it. And that changes how you learn everything. So what does this look like in practice? Not theory, not motivation. Actual thinking. Real thinkers don't start by memorizing. They start by breaking things. Not physically, but mentally. They take an idea and refuse to accept it as it is given. They pull it apart piece by piece until nothing is left but the core. Then they rebuild it in a way that makes sense to them. This is where most people fail. Because breaking something down feels uncomfortable. It exposes gaps. It forces you to admit you don't fully understand. And most people would rather protect their image than face that discomfort. So they stay on the surface. But real thinkers go deeper. They ask simple questions, almost embarrassingly simple. What is this? Why does it behave this way? What happens if I change one part? They don't rush to answers. They sit with confusion. They explore it. And slowly, patterns begin to form. Here's the contrast. Average learners try to move faster. Real thinkers slow down. Average learners collect information. Real thinkers connect it. Average learners look for the right answer. Real thinkers look for the reason behind it. That difference is everything. One builds fragile knowledge that disappears under pressure. The other builds a mental structure that holds, adapts, and expands. There's also something else they do that most people ignore. They translate everything into something real, not symbols, not abstract definitions, something they can picture, something they can feel. If they're learning about motion, they imagine movement. If they're learning about forces, they imagine pushing and pulling. If they're learning about light, they imagine how it travels, reflects, bends. Because you cannot think clearly about something you cannot visualize. And most people skip that step entirely. They stay in words, in symbols, in memorized patterns. And when those patterns change slightly, everything collapses. But when you understand the underlying idea, you don't rely on patterns, you adapt. This is also why real thinkers explain things simply. Not because the idea is simple, but because they understand it deeply enough to strip away everything unnecessary. If you can't explain something in a way that feels obvious, you haven't reached the core yet. And here's the part that changes your identity. They are not afraid of being wrong. They expect it. They use it. Every mistake is feedback. Every confusion is a signal. Instead of avoiding it, they move toward it. Because that's where understanding lies. This is not about being gifted. It's about building a habit, a way of approaching everything you learn. And once that habit forms, learning stops feeling like pressure. It starts feeling like discovery. But here's the part no one wants to admit. Most people will never use this method. Not because they can't. Because they won't. Understanding takes effort. Not the kind of effort you're used to. Not repeating. Not grinding, but a different kind. Slower. Deeper. More uncomfortable. It forces you to sit with confusion. To admit you don't understand. To question things you've always accepted. And most people avoid that. Because it feels easier to stay where they are. Memorization gives quick results. You study. You pass. You move on. It's clean. Predictable. Safe. Real thinking is none of those things. It's messy. It takes time. It doesn't guarantee immediate rewards. And in a world that values speed, that feels like failure. So people choose comfort. They follow the system. They trust what they're told. They avoid asking too many questions, not because they're incapable, but because they've been trained to believe that questioning is risky, that being slow means being less, that not understanding immediately means something is wrong with them. And that belief locks them in place. Here's the contrast. The average person wants certainty. The real thinker tolerates uncertainty. The average person wants answers. The real thinker wants understanding. The average person avoids confusion. The real thinker walks into it. That difference decides everything. Because once you stop avoiding confusion, something shifts. You stop pretending. You stop hiding behind memorized answers. You start seeing where your understanding breaks. And instead of ignoring it, you fix it, piece by piece. But that requires honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable. It means saying, I don't know. It means slowing down when everyone else is rushing. It means choosing depth when the system rewards speed. Most people won't do that. They'll stay in the loop, moving forward without ever really seeing. And that's why nothing changes. They keep learning more but understanding less. They keep collecting information but never building meaning. And over time, that gap grows so wide that they don't even notice it anymore. But you do. If you follow this far, if something in this feels familiar, then you've already stepped outside that pattern. You've already questioned something most people never question, and that matters. Because once you see the difference, you can't go back. You start noticing it everywhere. In conversations, in classrooms, and the way people speak with confidence about things they don't truly understand. And instead of accepting it, you pause, you think, you ask. That's where everything begins, not with knowing more, with refusing to accept less.